tax collectors, prostitutes, Gentiles, and sinners would often experience Jesus' wrath and condemnation, right? No, absolutely not. To the contrary, Jesus' preference for the tax collectors, prostitutes, all assortment of sinners would often end up getting him in trouble with the hierarchy of his day. Not once on the pages of the gospel Jesus is found furious, annoyed, or even irritated with anyone whom we would call a sinner. Now, there are few instances when Jesus gives so-called woe to you speech. But these two instances of woe, or we would say fire and brimstone sermon that Jesus gives, are applied to clergy, to theologians, and to the bankers or money changers. So unless you are clergy, theologian, or work in finance system, you should be okay. But woe to you, as Jesus said, scholars of the law, who put heavy burdens on others and do not lift a finger yourself. Woe to you. Everybody else who was excluded or excommunicated by the faith of his peers would end up finding a favor with Jesus. So what are we then to make of this gospel passage? How are we to understand this seemingly direct and somewhat unchristian instruction as to what we should do with sinners? Matthew appears to have Jesus advise us to ostracize such people or even banish them out of our families and churches. It's a little bit confusing, isn't it? What are we to do with this text when Jesus is so exclusive and instructing his disciples to banish the sinners and tax collectors and Gentiles, and all the other chapters when he's all lovey-dovey all the time? How do we put these two together? How do we make sense out of this challenging passage? I hope I will not scandalize you too much when I say that there is about 100% of chance that Jesus did not say that. We are certain that there is no way in heaven that Jesus said, ostracize them, banish them, let them be like Gentiles to you. How do we know that? There are several clues in the text itself. Matthew has Jesus say, if someone sins against you, first talk to them face to face. That's step number one. Step number two is, if they don't listen to you, bring a witness. Bring a buddy. So if somebody needs to testify, it won't be your word against their word. And if it doesn't happen, if his or her behavior does not change even then tell the church that there is someone who is misbehaving. And that's our clue. How could Jesus have said, tell the church? The church is not yet in existence. At this point, they are all good practicing Jews. There is no such thing as the church existing when Jesus is still alive. Jesus in no way could have said, go and tell the church to exclude them. Why? There is no church. The earliest point we can speak of the church is when? The Pentecost, right? After Jesus' death, resurrection, and ascension, 50 days after Easter, the Spirit descends upon the people, and they start to give public witness to the risen Christ. The church is born out of the Spirit. And in Matthew chapter 18, we are a long way from the day of Pentecost. When Matthew has Jesus say these words, in quotation marks, Jesus is still alive, crucifixion has not happened, resurrection has not happened, the Spirit has not descended, ergo, church is not here just yet. What this text tells us is more about how the early church was struggling with divisions and difference of opinion, with internal struggle. Unfortunately, unlike many churches these days, the sermons of Jesus were not live streamed. There was nobody walking behind Jesus with a microphone and saying, on the record, could you repeat please? We do not know what Jesus said for certain. But we know he couldn't have said that. Matthew writes his gospel at the earliest, in the early 70s, about 3 to 4 decades after Jesus' death and resurrection. And when he was writing, the church had many different options. There were divisions in existence in the early church. So what Matthew is writing, this, I call it Sinner's Instruction Manual, tells us more about what's going in the church in the 70s AD than on how Jesus is instructing us what to do with people who drive us crazy. After all, if, as Matthew says, if we are to treat them as tax collectors and Gentiles, we should do what Jesus did with tax collectors and Gentiles. Become friends with them. Eat and dine under their roofs. Love them and accept them unconditionally. This way showing God's love that is all-embracing and unconditional. That last piece of advice is what we should focus on today. Treat them as if they were Gentiles or tax collectors. Love them. Transform their lives by acceptance and unconditional love, just as Jesus did.